Right, so today I wanted to make a video about Black Lives Matter and all this stuff that's going on these days that is absolutely crazy, and there's a lot of stuff to unpack here. There's probably some stuff I'll forget, so anyway, I'll try and do my best, but I wanted to make a video to kind of be the voice of reason when it comes to this kind of stuff, and the problem being is that we've pretty much gone off the deep end as a society. Now, that may be a little bit of a hyperbole, but we're at the point to where we have Black Lives Matter literally calling to defund the police. Now, I don't see how anybody can possibly actually take this seriously. Like, I don't. Now, I guess the first thing I'll point out, too, just to get it out before people run into the comments section trying to rake you over the coals. Uh, I do believe George Floyd was murdered. I do believe that the cop was not justified in doing what he did. Um, but on the other hand, not on the other hand, that's a bad way of putting it because it sounds like I'm justifying it, which I'm not. But how do we know that this was a racist altercation? Like, I mean, we know that the cop killed the guy. I mean, clearly he was using way too much force. I mean, I don't know hardly anybody who's saying that he was justified in doing what he did. In fact, I don't think I've literally seen anybody. But how do we know that it was a racist incident? Now, the thing is that most people, in fact, I'd say probably 99% of people, are just assuming that because it was a white cop that killed a black guy, that it must be racism. And that's one of the problems we have in society nowadays, that uh, we see a black victim and a white perpetrator, and we assume it must be racism. But most of the time, it isn't. I mean, sometimes, yeah, racism definitely does exist to some degree. Um, but what Western countries are of the least racist countries in the world. The stats will back that up. Whites are of the least racist races in the world. The facts will back that up. So the idea that's perpetrated by the media and academia and public schools and most leftist, in fact, almost all leftist politicians, even a lot of right wing politicians, by celebrities, that racism is this rampant issue in society nowadays. The facts don't play that out. The facts play it out that racism affects all races relatively equally. I mean, um, blacks are not more likely, again, I literally posted about that today. There's studies that show that blacks are not more likely to be killed by cops because of racism than any other race. There's no evidence of that. People just take it as the reason why people think that is that whenever a black guy is killed in police custody or killed by police, the mainstream media is all over it. It's front page news, it's national, worldwide news, at least in this scenario. And when a white guy gets killed by police, nobody cares. When an Asian guy or a Hispanic guy to a lesser degree gets killed, um, nobody cares. And this is one of the reasons why people think that it's so bad is that um, the mainstream media makes it appear like it's a lot worse than it actually is. So that is one of the problems when it comes to that kind of stuff. So and it's like I say too, the studies that I've seen show that it's no more likely. I mean, does racism exist? Absolutely. Has racism existed? Absolutely. But until you can get past the past, you're never going to be able to live in the present. I've heard this from multiple blacks in person saying that yeah, most of that stuff happened 50, 100 years ago. Like you got to let that stuff go. Now, the problem is that they perceive, and a lot of it rightfully so, that there's still a lot of racism today. The problem with that is that in the past, or at least let's take the civil rights era for example, did did MLK and his supporters have to violently loot and kill a bunch of people? And I mean, MLK had a lot of issues to say the least, but um, when it came to the civil rights stuff, they didn't have to commit massive amounts of violence. They didn't have to burn down cities. And I don't see how anybody could possibly make the argument and be justified in saying that there's more racism today than there was 50, 60 years ago, because objectively there isn't. There isn't more racism nowadays than there was back then. And yet MLK was still largely peaceful from what I've read. So why do we need to get violent now? And again, getting back to the whole defund the police thing, how does that make any sense? This is the problem. This is the big problem that I'm going to point out. And people say, "Oh, you're racist for disagreeing with us." No, here's the main reason why I disagree, and why most people who disagree. Now, they don't completely disagree. They just disagree with the solution. Um, what's going to happen is that because of this rioting and because of the all this stuff that's going on. I mean, the politicians only care about the votes. They only care about the votes. So they will pander to, they will say whatever they need to say to get these people to vote for them. They will vote for them, and the problem will never change. I mean, look at San Francisco. I mean, look at the largely Democratic run areas. They're overwhelmingly black, and they overwhelmingly vote for the same stuff over and over again and expect a different result. Cops are becoming less and less likely to want to patrol and to help out the black community, because if they take one step too far, now again, the George Floyd situation, the cop was absolutely went way too far. But there's many examples, Trayvon, Mike Brown. I mean, I know Trayvon wasn't a cop incident, but where whites have been completely justified in doing what they were doing, and yet turned around and had their lives destroyed because of it. So this is the problem: is that cops are going to be less likely to want to enter into these black neighborhoods, which is going to cause more crime, which is going to cause more issues, which the people, the blacks in society in general, is going to blame on racism. And again, it's this deathly spiraling circle that, again, we can't just admit that, hey, most of the problems isn't the cops. The problems is that we're not being honest with ourselves. We just have this death spiral, and this is why people are against it. There's this death spiral of, you continuously don't want to change the way we go about doing things. And the reason why people are against it, basically to sum it up, is that the problem just continues to fester and to fester because we don't admit what's causing the problems in the first place. What's causing the problems in the first place is politicians who don't give a rat's you know what about these people, especially the Democrats. And again, let's just be honest, the Democrats are the ones largely running these communities. Therefore, it's largely the Democrats' fault. So let's stop pretending that that's not the case. Um, the other problems too is they continuously blame cops. The cops are they're the plight of all their problem. No, they're not. No, they're not. Is there some racist cops? Absolutely. But are they, if racism amongst the police force would end, then society would magically live in harmony? No, it would hardly change a thing, because most blacks are killed by other blacks. And until we can point that stuff out and figure out, hey, how do we get black people to stop killing other black people? How do we get black people to stop devaluing their own neighborhoods? How do we get black people to stop um, creating massive incentives for people to not want to open businesses near their neighborhoods? Because that's what's actually hurting them. That's what's doing the most damage. Does racist policing do some damage? Yes, but the vast majority is not to do with the cops. The vast majority is not systemic racism. It's just not true. So getting to this point here from Larry Elder, which is the other thing I wanted to talk about. Now he brings up a very good point in saying, um, he says, assume there's a vaccine against white racism. Would 70% of black kids still be raised in fatherless homes? Would 50% of blacks still drop out of many urban high schools? Would 25% of young black urban men still have criminal records? Would blacks still kill 7,000 blacks every year? Now, this is the problem, that most of the problems that we face in that blacks face in society are problems that they were fully supportive of, or are problems that we just don't want to admit as a society. We refuse to admit as a society that growing up in a single parent household disproportionately makes you more likely to end up in jail, to drop out of high school, to die earlier, basically. And until we can admit that kind of stuff, we're not going to improve. And this is the problem. This is the other big reason why people disagree with the whole blackout thing and all that kind of stuff, is they know that the solutions that they're proposing are not going to fix the problem. They're trying to fix a problem. They're trying to fix a problem by blaming the wrong thing. They're trying to blame 70% of black kids being raised in fatherless homes, 50% of black kids dropping out of high school, 25% of black kids um, having criminal records on systemic racism, which isn't the majority of the problem. The majority of the problem is that we're not communicating the importance of being raised in a two-parent household. We're not valuing the importance of graduating high school, and we're not promoting the importance of not having a criminal record. The problem is that because many of these kids don't have a stable household, they don't have stable relationships with their family, which means you want stable relationships with other people, and gangs are an easy out for that kind of stuff. That there's data that backs that up, that people who grow up in unstable relationships within their house disproportionately end up in gangs, which just causes more and more problems. And the reason why these problems, like I've said before, and I'll keep saying because people don't seem to get it, is that the reason why these problems continue to fester is that people continue to blame the wrong things and ignore the real problems. If you actually care, again, if we actually care about Black lives, we need to point this kind of stuff out. We need to figure out how do we solve these problems. And again, the problem too is that this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen because the Democrats overwhelmingly get votes from single moms. They overwhelmingly get votes from kids of single moms. So they're never going to implement policies that are going to reduce single parent households. Um, they overwhelmingly get support because of high school dropouts and people ending up in jail, because high school dropouts are people that are going to be disproportionately end up on welfare, on social assistance, which again, people on social assistance tend to vote for the left. People who have criminal records, very hard to get a job, which means disproportionately to end up on social assistance or some form of government help in any way, shape, or form. Which means, again, disproportionately likely to vote for the left. Now, I'm not just simply blaming the whole problem on the left, but that is another problem that we need to admit as a society, that if we actually want to fix these problems, we need to implement policies that de-incentivize this kind of stuff. We need to implement policies that de-incentivize this kind of stuff, or else the problem is not going to get better. I guarantee you that. Um, Maybe ever so slightly, but again, this kind of stuff seems to come up every 5 years or so. I think it's partially due to the fact that it's an election year. The media loves to stir the pot of racism during election years because it's good for ratings, and it helps the left usually too. So that's another thing to bring up. But basically, to sum it up, we got to be more honest with ourselves. Like, we got to be more honest with ourselves. We're not going to get anywhere by blaming the. Again, we're stepping over a large pile of bodies and worrying about a small pile of bodies. The small pile of bodies definitely still does matter, but the value of two human lives is worth more than the value of one human life. And like I say, the overwhelming majority of people are not racist. The problem is people take, if you agree with my position in the slightest, as being, oh, you must be a racist. No, that's not the case. They just disagree on what the solution is. And when your solution is to defund the police, then again, you're not gonna fix the problem. Like, you're not gonna fix the problem. So anyway, that about sums it up. I don't want to talk too long, so I'm going to leave it there. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got links in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple of things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Check me out on BitChute. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.